One thing that I encourage educators to do, and especially if you have the opportunity to have an instructional coach, man, you're so blessed.
Mm.
But ask that instructional coach to sit in your classroom and observe. And what they're looking for are triggers for undesirable behavior. So I call this the anecdote. We're going to go through like the ABCs of behavior management. So we look at the anecdote first. What's happening? What is the setting? And what is the trigger that creates disruption?
Mm.
Is it something that, as soon as you start reading a text, they immediately disengage? Is it when you start talking about something in particular, they disengage?
Mm.
Or maybe it's even kind of like the tone, the speed, the cadence of the instruction that's happening, or the opportunities that they get to converse with one another. So when you can identify that anecdote, that trigger, that's going to say a lot to us.
And so the observer is fundamentally looking at, we'll say, patterns.
Mm-hmm.
As example, if you start reading, then they do this, and they do this every time you start reading. If you talk about mathematics, for example, they do this, and they do this every time you talk about mathematics. And that's basically what they're looking for, this sort of trigger.
100%. And it even can be timestamps. One thing that I have noticed is when I go into classrooms, the teacher will start instruction and it starts off okay. Like,
Right.
he or she has the attention of the students. But then the more that they start, maybe they start repeating themselves or it goes lengthier, you start to see the fidgeting or the getting on their phones
Right.
or things like that. And so you have a trigger right there, which says a lot to a teacher. They can take that information and run with it.
Fantastic. What's the B?
The B is the behavior. So if I'm looking at the anecdote and I notice that maybe the teacher's going a little long with instruction, or maybe they have not once related it to the child's life, to the kid sitting in their classroom, and I notice that students immediately get out their cell phones. That to me is an indicator that they are disengaged. And so when I'm sitting with the teacher and we start talking about the behavior, the trend is getting out the cell phones. Then we can come up with a solution that addresses the cell phones. And that's when we move into the C, and that's the consequence. So whatever, I know teachers, there's 20 million systems out there for consequences.
Right.
Whatever you choose, my advice is just be consistent. It is consistency, consistency, consistency. If you say you're gonna do it, do it. And
every time.
If you're going to give it to, if you're going to hold one student to a high expectation, you hold all of them to a high expectation. And so it all goes down to that. The anecdote, see what's happening, what's the trigger, what behavior is being executed because of that trigger, and let's develop a specific consequence for that behavior. And it can look, consequence sounds like a negative, it has a negative connotation, but it could mean several different things for that classroom.
What else are some of the A's or some of the triggers?
Some of the other triggers that are often out of the teacher's control could be other classmates. We can have two students in the classroom change the dynamics completely.
Oh, one student
is
able to do that.
Oh my gosh. Yes. You gotta love them. They keep life interesting.
Exactly.
It could also be something along the lines of when you're having classroom discussions. So when maybe you provide an opportunity for students to engage in discourse and you notice a student shut down. And as soon as that happens, maybe that's a trigger for a student and they want to just grab the attention of everyone in the room. And so you're really truly narrowing that down. And if I notice it is, when I ask students to turn and talk, I have 3 kids that start acting a fool. I'm going to then narrow down my structures and put in specific routines and procedures in place to address them.
Okay, so there are class-wide triggers as well as sort of individual triggers. And of course, we have to be mindful of each.
And that's why every class is different. And so we often see teachers feeling extremely defeated because they have routines and systems in place, but it doesn't necessarily fit the needs of each of their classrooms.
Right.
And that is why I have always been a huge proponent of classroom contracts, if you follow through with them and keep them consistent. And building relationships with students is essential. I don't mean be your best friend.
Right.
I don't mean, you gotta know everything about their life, but just taking the opportunity to speak with them one-on-one, include information in your class that you do know that they are interested in, and play on their strengths. Know what their strengths are and help them to feel confident in the classroom.
And then you got the behaviors, which I'm going to just go ahead and assume, every classroom is different. Every student is different. You got the phones out, you got the nodding of the napping, you got the snacks, behind the desk, you have a whole million things. You have the chit chatter. And so I'm going to skip that because I think we all know what the behaviors are of our students when that trigger happens. What about consequences? I mean, and again, consequences are not punishments. We used to say, we're going to punish you. It is now a consequence that is relevant and that is just. Give me some examples of consequences that work that you've sort of witnessed or experienced.
The number one thing that I would say is, and this is for administrators, this is for any principal that is listening, whatever the consequence is, it will be stronger if it is aligned across your entire campus. And I'm specifically thinking of secondary when students visit 8 classrooms a day. And if 8 teachers have different rules and expectations, it creates chaos. So I have worked along several teams where, I'm going to use cell phones because that is an issue, where some teachers were extremely strict. I don't want to see it. I'm going to take it away. It's going to cell phone jail, whatever. And then we had some teachers that were like, I don't care. That's the least of my worries. But if that is changing constantly class period to class period, it's not going to be as successful. And so administrators, when you are speaking with your teachers about routines and procedures and contracts, there does need to be a system that is aligned and holding everyone accountable to it, again, to whatever that may be. I've also found that classroom contracts are extremely beneficial when students have the opportunity to get clear on the consequences. So one thing that I would tell my students is, okay, students, we have a cell phone issue. So if I see you on your cell phone, what should be the immediate consequence? And they'll give me feedback like, oh, just leave me alone, miss. And I'm like, no.
Nice try.
Nice try. And they're like, oh, well, just tell us to put it away the first time. Okay, I can do that. But what happens the second time? And then we have the conversation about cell phone jail. I've seen a lot of teachers do that. I've seen, hey, you know what? I ain't touching your phone because I don't want to get in a conflict with that. But you will take your phone to the front office. Like you will be the one to go to you just have those systems in place, but they need to be clarified with the students. And here is something, especially my secondary teachers, we miss the mark on this. We cannot just give the routines and procedures on the very first day and assume they have it.
And that's it, right?
We have to constantly practice it. I have my kids practice acting a fool and I show them what it's going to look like. And I do this for weeks. And then when they try to argue with me, I'm just like, I love you so much. And you remember the rehearsal, right? What happened in the rehearsal? And then I'm like, I got to follow through because I love you and I'm holding you to a high expectation. And then that's it. You do have instances, I will be honest, you have the instances where the kid's going to cuss you out, where they're going to do the things, they're going to threaten all the things. But those are different consequences and different protocols.
Expectations have to be set. Expectations have to be clear. Expectations have to come with the aid of of your students who are basically going to help you create these expectations and the consequences for them. And so that
Absolutely.
basically builds a responsibility on the students where they have signed an agreement. It could be an actual agreement or a verbal agreement that you are going to follow through with, and then you follow through with it. You keep reinforcing it and you keep reminding them of it, and you yourself have to follow through with it, because if you're not consistent, it all goes to hell.
Yeah, and I'm going to add another thing in there. When you're talking about consequences with students, it's essential that they understand the why. And I like to explain the why before the problem ever happens. Like having, I'm going to already have a plan in place, because I know I always taught 8th grade. Like I was an 8th grade teacher. I know what my junior high kids are going to do. So I'm going to pre-plan and explain the why, because even as adults, if we get our hand slapped or we have a consequence for our actions, we want to know the why. Like, why was this so harmful in the first place? And when everyone has a cell phone, everyone uses their cell phone for everything. Teachers are on their cell phones a lot. They're going to want to know what's the big deal.
Right.
And so there needs to be that conversation before the problem ever occurs.
So as you're presenting your expectations, you are also explaining the action and reaction, the cause and effect. Why are we not supposed to, be on our phones? Why are we not my big thing was, you can't go to the bathroom in my class.
Yeah.
That's not happening. Right. And I explained, because if you leave the classroom, that means you're going to miss something, whether it's instruction, whether it's a question, whether it is an activity, you're missing some sort of learning happening. So please go to the bathroom either before or after. I expect you not to raise your hand and ask me to go to the bathroom in the middle of class.
Yeah. It's so funny you said that. I had the same expectation, and I know that that's controversial.
It is. Everyone's like,
yeah, but I told my students why. I had a young gentleman whom I adore and love, but he was experiencing his gang initiation. And part of it was to set the school on fire. And so he went to the restroom during my class and set the school on fire. And so when the fire alarm goes off and we're walking past the bathroom and like flames are bursting out, we didn't know who it was. But then when they looked at the cameras, it was like, oh, Miss Crabtree, he was from your class. And I was like, I'm never letting a kid go to the bathroom again. And when I told them that story, they were like, oh, okay, I get it. And they laughed. I mean, we can laugh about it now, but I talked about that specific reason, and I'm like, I'm responsible for your safety.
Right.
I'm responsible for your learning, and these are the expectations.
Fair enough.